Angle on America is back on this Wednesday. Top stories in the world of American politics, starting with this ongoing controversy about Republican politician Roy Moore. U.S. President Donald Trump is defending Moore outright. Moore, of course, has been accused of inappropriate sexual conduct with women, including some underage teenage girls years and years ago. Donald Trump indicating that Roy Moore has denied the charges. People are innocent until proven guilty. And, of course, there are politics involved. The Republicans really need to hold on to that seat in the Senate. They want it to stay Republican. The special election is coming up in less than a month. On the 12th of December, we've got our Angle on America panelists standing by. Dory Clark is with us, and Jeff Mason is also joining us here. Jeff, let me start with you. You're down there at the White House. I got to ask you about Donald Trump and Roy Moore, and I guess at the end of the day, the political calculus that went on in the White House in terms of Donald Trump coming out very publicly in favor of Roy Moore's campaign.
Yeah, he certainly did, and I'm not actually at the White House right now, but I was yesterday as a White House correspondent, and when the president came out to leave for his trip to Florida, he spoke to reporters and took some questions on Roy Moore, and he was absolutely ready for them, which was just a little bit of a surprise because we had asked him some questions earlier in the week during what we call a pool spray, when reporters go in to a meeting that he's having and shout questions, and he declined to answer them. But this time he was ready, and it was clearly a show of a shift in strategy by this White House that it was time for him to say something, because maybe they're concerned that Roy Moore's opponent, the Democrat Doug Jones, might actually win. He didn't come out and say, I endorse Roy Moore again, or I stand by my endorsement. But as you said in your intro, he absolutely defended him and seemed to suggest he believes Roy Moore's denials of those allegations. So that was, and he also, I should add, left open the possibility of going out to campaign for him. So it was a shift in strategy and a sign that they really want Moore to win.
The fact, Dory, that we're even talking about the possibility of the Democrats winning a Senate seat in Alabama is astonishing, of course, and the White House wants to make sure that does not happen. What do you make of what Donald Trump said?
Trump, Todd, has been ultimately trying to have it a little bit both ways. He did not officially endorse Roy Moore. He would lose a lot of stature if he came out strongly and endorsed him, and then if Roy Moore were to lose. Of course, Donald Trump had endorsed and campaigned for Moore's opponent in the Republican primary, Luther Strange, and Moore, in a triumph of Donald Trump's former advisor, Steve Bannon, actually ended up winning. So he's cutting it close. However, this certainly shows that Trump is starting to sweat a little bit about his tax proposal, which has now passed the Senate, and it is waiting for a Senate vote. He needs those votes. The Republicans only control it by a 52 to 48 margin. They don't have a lot of room for defectors, and they know that Roy Moore would staunchly support it.
What do you think, Jeff, in terms of Roy Moore's chances now, where we are right now, the 22nd of November?
Well, it's a good question. First thing, I just want a mild correction that the Senate bill has passed the House. It's still waiting for approval in the Senate. And the president did not he did put his backing behind Moore after that primary election. He wasn't endorsing Moore during the primary, but he did give his backing to him after he won, although he did want Luther Strange to win. But that did not happen, and Steve Bannon's candidate basically won, and that's Moore. And right now, in terms of back to your question about what are his chances, it's just hard to say. And it's hard to say because nobody really knows whether or not to believe the polls. There are polls that show Doug Jones pulling ahead. There was a Fox News poll, I believe, that showed him ahead 8 points, which is pretty significant. But as we have learned, certainly last year during the 2016 election, sometimes people will tell pollsters something that they don't necessarily fall through on in the voting booth. So it's just hard to say. But he certainly has a chance of losing. There's no question about that. And the White House is acknowledging that by having President Trump make the comments that he did.
All right, speaking of the president, let's move on to this bizarre feud between Donald Trump and Lavar Ball, who is the father of a UCLA basketball player who was stopped in China for shoplifting. And the president now sending out these tweets, and we're going to show them to our viewers here, talking about who was responsible for the negotiation of this guy's release and the role that Donald Trump played in it all, and the president calling the father, an ungrateful fool, and a poor man's Don King, and on it goes here, talking about shoplifting. Dory, you start this one off for us. What do you make of the back and forth?
Well, ultimately, it comes down to a question of what is presidential behavior. Donald Trump has consistently gone against what have been standard norms in American politics again and again. It would have been inconceivable for President Obama, President Bush, or any of their predecessors to directly get into a mano a mano argument on Twitter with as a private citizen. But Donald Trump knows that when he is rallying his base, when he is speaking out against perceived insults to the respect that he feels that he's due, it turns out that his supporters get fired up by that. And so it seems to be yet another instance of this, which is really splitting Republicans and Democrats in their responses. His base loves it and thinks that he's standing strong, but many people are mortified by the behavior.
Jeff, I'm curious to get your read on it.
I mean, I think Dory's absolutely right that he does use Twitter to mobilize his base. I'm actually not sure that that's what he's doing here. I think this is just an example of President Trump having a thin skin, and he does. He has one. He's not somebody who likes to see himself criticized, particularly when he thinks he's done something well. And I think he took some pride in whatever moves he made to encourage China to let those three students go, and he's offended by this, and he doesn't let it go, and that's just kind of his MO.
All right, the last one for the three of us here, and I'm curious to get what the two of you think about this. Of course, the Republicans are hoping to pass a tax reform bill. The president would certainly like it by Christmas. He said it would be a great Christmas present for him. But again, there seem to be a number of possibly rogue Republicans who are sitting on the fence, and we're going to show some of them here. We've put together a board that'll outline everyone from Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, Jeff Flake, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Bob Corker, John McCain. We're not sure how many of these are sitting on the fence, how many of them will actually support the tax plan when push comes to shove. They all know what's at stake here. But of course, the Republicans can only afford to lose two, I guess, two maximum. What about this, Dory? I mean, do you think this is actually going to be passed by the end of the year?
Under normal circumstances, a president has the ability to pull members of his party in the House or in the Senate into line with him because they have a collective vision and a shared agenda. Now, of course, tax cuts and tax reform have long been a core tenet of the Republican Party, and many people in principle are excited to see that happen. But Donald Trump does not have a lot of fans, even within members of the Republican Party. Some of these swing Republican senators like Bob Corker and Jeff Flake are people that he has gotten into bitter disagreements with. And so I think with such a narrow margin, the real question comes down to, do Corker, to Flake, to Collins decide that the bill is a win for them with their constituents? This is not going to be a situation where someone is taking it for the team and doing it for the greater good of Donald Trump and the Republican Party. They are all making their own individual calculations here, and that is something that could be dangerous for President Trump.
Jeff, I know you're monitoring all of this too, the ins and the outs. What do you think?
Well, what's striking to me about the list of names that you just put up on your screen and talked about is what's something that they all have in common. Almost all of them have in common that President Trump has alienated them in some way or criticized them in some way. He certainly has John McCain. One of the first things he did as a candidate that many people were aghast by when he said that John McCain wasn't a hero and he prefers people who don't get caught, because John McCain, of course, being a veteran of the Vietnam War. He has had a back and forth of critical tweets and comments with Senator Corker. The same with Senator Flake. These are all people who don't necessarily have an incentive to give the president what he wants. That said, Republicans generally, broadly, believe in tax reform and this kind of a tax overhaul. So even though there may be strained relationships between some of these senators that you mentioned and the president, that doesn't mean they won't support it if in the end they think that the bill has the principles that they can subscribe to.
Jeff Mason, Dory Clark joining us today. Great to have the two of you with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Todd.